There we go. So yes, just want to encourage you to stay with it. Many of you are doing a great job with keeping up with your assignments, but I know sometimes with work or other responsibilities, it can be hard, but just try to give. I recommend giving, just setting a one time slot a week aside, like 2 or 3 hours on a particular day. If you do that every week, I think you'll be able to not get too far behind. And so I think that's the best way. Just put it in your schedule, whether it's, Mondays from 9 a.m. to noon or Thursday nights or whatever works best for you guys. But I have found that the students who do that, who just set a time on their calendar each week, um, have done the best at maintaining being able to keep up with the assignments and also to help each other too. If you have questions or of guys that are struggling a little bit, please feel free to help one another. Now, don't copy each other's assignments, but feel free to help each other if you have questions. Um, I, I'm totally want to encourage that. Of course, you can always ask me, and a lot of you guys do, which is great. I'm happy to help in that way. But you can ask of each other as well and work together. I think that will really be helpful if you're able to do that. So with that, I've last week we looked at connector words and sort of had introduction to foundation. And as I've been grading the assignments on the connector words, there's a couple of things I've noticed that need attention that I think would be helpful to us. One is participles. I think those are the most difficult connector words. And so I wanted to spend time today on talking about participles again. So again, I apologize. So you're going to need your tissues again because we're going to do English grammar, but that's just the way it is, brothers. And that will be also as the better we are with the grammar, the better you're going to be at understanding the text and be able to use the resources and tools that are available. But participles are probably the most complicated connector word, not only in English, but also in Greek. They have many different ways that they can function. And so that's what makes it difficult. Now, in English, what makes it even more difficult is the participles can also look like regular verbs or nouns or past tense verbs. And so that makes it complicated. So I wanted to go through a few passages from Colossians, actually. So I'm going to give you help a little bit on the homework assignment, but I want to go through and just help you with various ways that participles, what they can look like and what words may look like a participle, but not actually be one. So let me start in our notes here. And again, if you have any questions, just raise hand, interrupt me. I want to make sure that I can answer any questions you guys have. That's the priority. Okay. So as we've gone through the various steps in the assignments, the sessions are noted here. We're focusing our attention now on block diagramming. Again, as I mentioned last session, this is one of the most critical steps in the process of studying epistles and will yield a lot of helpful insights in the passage. And so the procedure for doing that is these 4 steps that we've covered in class. These are in your notes in the syllabus. I forget the page numbers there, but there are 4 steps basically that we've laid out for you to first identify the first independent clause that you see in the sentence, in the paragraph. And then secondly is to identify the rest of the phrases and clauses by looking for the connector words. And again, remember, a clause is a group of words that present an idea that go together that contain a subject and a verb. A phrase, group of words that go together but don't contain a subject and a verb. Now, what these phrases and clauses, they're typically introduced by what we call connector words. And if you remember, there are 4 kinds of connector words: conjunctions, prepositions, relative pronouns, and participles. And so I'm going to skip the first 3. Next week, I hope to come back and I'll cover those. Those are a little bit easier to deal with. And I noticed from grading the homework, most of you guys did pretty well on those. It was the participles that created the most challenge from what I observed. And so I want to spend time on these. Now, if you've already turned in your assignment and I've graded it, that's fine. If you want to go back and make corrections, you can. I pretty much gave you the answers in my response to your assignments, but you're welcome to go back and review again if you want. But don't feel bad if you miss some things. The point of the assignments is to help us grow and learn. And don't make your goal. I think sometimes we can make our goal as getting a best grade on the assignment rather than learning from the assignment. I remember a seminary professor told me one time, he said, there are some brothers who get C's that are being faithful, and some men who get A's who are not being faithful. So what he meant was just some of us, this is easier for us. Maybe some of you are good at grammar or good at English, and so you don't have a problem, but others may be more of a challenge. And the issue is just being faithful. Just do the work, put in the effort. That's what God's looking for. Don't worry about the results. You just do the best that you can. And so as we're going through these examples, you may think, oh man, I missed that on the assignment, or that's okay. The point is to learn. Because at the end of the day, God is going to hold us accountable to be faithful messengers of his word, those who seek to live out his word and to apply it and to help others. Okay? So I'm not endorsing doing a bad job, but I know sometimes we can put our best effort in and still maybe not get the highest of grades or the best results. And that's okay. It's the faithfulness that's most important. I know some of you have a lot of responsibilities, so doing these assignments can be a big challenge. And so so I understand that. So please don't feel bad if you get a lower score than you thought you should have, or lower than you wanted. That's not, it's all those scores are meant to do is just to be a guide to say, okay, you need to work on certain things here. And so today, as we go through the participles, and the next week as we discuss the other connector words, please don't feel bad if you missed it, or don't feel bad if you didn't get it, or if you had problems with the assignment. My hope is that just from our times together, you'll be learning. And so then the next time when it matters, when you're actually preparing a message to preach, that you'll have learned more and be able to be more faithful and effective in doing that. Okay? So with that, let's take a look at participles. All right, so I'm just gonna skip through the conjunctions, prepositions, relative pronouns. Again, we'll cover those next week. I want to focus our attention this morning on participles. All right. They are defined as a verbal which modifies another verb or a noun. Okay. And verbals, which we're going to look at in a little bit, this is why participles are so hard. They're in this category, this group of words called verbals. And verbals are just simply words that have a verb in them, but don't act like a normal verb in English. All right. They can act like an adjective or an adverb or a noun even. And so verbals there's three kinds of verbals in English. One group of verbals is called a participle. Okay. And that is the form of it is a verb plus ing or ed ending. Okay, so like running, all right, would be potentially a participle, or standing, or yelling, or preaching. Okay, these have the form of a participle. Now they may not always be one, and we'll talk about that challenge in a moment, but that's the form that they take. Another kind of verbal is called in English a gerund. And a gerund is often a verb plus an ing ending, but it acts like a noun. Okay, participles. Let me do this. A participle can act like an adverb or adjective. Okay, if you remember, adverbs modify other verbs, adjectives modify nouns. Technically, adjectives modify nouns and adverbs modify everything else. All right, but participles can do either one. They can modify a noun or a verb, and they have the form of a verb with an ing or ed ending. So like I said, like preaching. Preaching could be a participle. The verb preach, and then ending with ing. Now, a gerund is another type of participle that acts like a noun, but it could look like, sorry, a gerund is another word that looks like a participle, but can act like a noun. Sorry about that. And then thirdly, and this is another thing I noticed some of you had a little bit of struggle with, are verbals called infinitives. Now, an infinitive is the preposition to in English plus a verb. So like to preach. All right. To here, this is not a prepositional phrase. This is actually called an infinitive because it's the preposition to followed by a verb. We'll talk about infinitives next session together. We won't focus on those today because I want to focus on participles. But notice each of these three kinds of words, a participle, a gerund, and an infinitive, all have a verb in the form of the word, but the word doesn't act like a normal verb. Okay? Like I said, a participle can act like an adverb or adjective. A gerund can act like a noun. An infinitive can act like a noun or an adverb or an adjective, but usually a noun or an adverb. So this is getting confusing, right? Well, again, keep your tissue nearby. This is what makes English challenging with these verbals. Now, with the participles, let's look at those for a moment. All right. Again, the form of a participle can look like this: a verb plus an ing or ed ending. So preaching could be a participle, or preached even could be a participle. All right. We'll look at some examples in a minute. But for example, you could say he or the pastor entered the pulpit preaching the word, or let me do it this way. The pastor stood at the pulpit preaching the word of God. Okay. Here we have the pastor stood. That's my independent clause. Where did he stand? At the pulpit. Notice we have at, a preposition. And then preaching the word of God. That's another phrase that is connected by preaching. And preaching here is a participle. It's saying what the pastor did. It's modifying what he did at the pulpit. All right, preaching the word of God. Now, we could also have the preached. Let me leave it at that for now. Okay, we'll get into more examples in a minute. And again, stop me if you have a question. Now, how do participles function? I just talked about this. They can modify a noun or a verb. All right, and if you remember parts of speech that Brother Stanley talked about in class, there are basically in English 4 basic parts of speech. There's a noun and a verb. All right, a noun is a person, place, or thing. A verb expresses an action or a mode of being. So it is a noun doing something or being something. That's what a verb identifies. Now, an adjective modifies or describes a noun. What kind of noun? Which noun? Who? How many? Whereas an adverb modifies or describes a verb, usually by telling when, where, or why the verb happens. Okay, so if you can remember these 4 basic parts of speech, it will really help you when we do diagramming. All right, because basically what we have in a diagram, right, is we have a paragraph that's made up of sentences, phrases, and clauses. And those phrases and clauses are linked to each other in some way. Each phrase or clause is modifying something else. Unless, of course, it's an independent clause that stands alone. But every phrase or dependent clause is modifying something else in the sentence. And basically, it's going to be modifying a noun or a verb. Okay, that's the basic form. And so, again, keep this table in mind. It's on your in your syllabus, but it's an important table because it identifies those 4 basic elements, 4 parts of speech that we have. And again, as participles, they can function like an adjective or an adverb. And again, what does an adjective modify? It modifies a noun. What does an adverb modify? Well, we're given a hint by the word. It modifies usually another verb or an adverb sometimes, or adjective. Okay? Any questions so far on this? Hopefully this is just review, but I know we covered a lot of things in class, so all right, I'll keep going if there's nothing yet. All right, now let's look at a couple examples just to get refreshed, and then we'll look at a few passages in Colossians and just go through them together. Okay?
Hello,
Yeah, Kim.
Pastor Tim.
Yeah.
Just a clarification. So the participle can also, um, I mean, it can also be used as a noun. Yeah, I think that's one of the confusion that I had. So if the word is or if the participle is being used as a noun, it can be considered that way, right?
Um, there
Like
are.
if it
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. So if the let's say for example, if a certain word is being used as a let me just check my assignment real quick. Like
Actually,
a gerund, is it?
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, regarding gerund, so is it still a participle or not anymore?
A gerund looks like a participle, um, but is not a participle.
Mm,
Okay, because a participle will not function like a noun. All right, but gerunds do, and the problem is they can look the same. So how do we know the difference? So if you have a participle, it will not function like a noun. Okay, as I mentioned up here, participles act like an adverb or adjective. A gerund acts like a noun, but looks like a participle. And that's the problem in English. Okay. How do we know the difference? I'm going to show you a couple ways to figure that out. Okay. Because yeah, in the Colossians assignment, there were several words that look like participles, but actually weren't. Some of them were actually nouns, and others were actually regular verbs. So when we go through the Colossians example, I'll show that to you, okay? So if we go through the example and it still doesn't make sense, ask the question again, okay? So let me just go through participles here, a couple examples, then we'll go to the Colossians text and start seeing the differences. All right. So in the first example, the man went to his home, and here it's running as fast as he could. So the man went is my main clause. To his home tells me where he went, and then running as fast as he could tells me how he went. All right. And this running is a participle. Notice it has the form, the verb run, ending in ing. All right. And so if I were to diagram this, I would do it this way. The man went. Where did he go? To his home. How did he go? Running as fast as he could. Okay. And the running to is a preposition. It introduces the phrase to his home. Running is a participle introducing the phrase as fast as he could. Now, what if we had this? Let's see. The running man went to his home as fast as he could. Notice I changed I moved the word running to the front of man. Now, running is describing the man. What kind of man? The running man. So here, running is also a participle, but this time it's modifying the noun man. It's telling us something about the man. How do I know that? Because it comes right before man. The running man. Okay? It's not the man who was running. It is the running man. So it's telling us something about the man. And so it's modifying man in this case. What kind of man? All right, the rest of it would look like this. And then running technically is modifying man, telling us something about the man. All right, in this case, running is modifying went, telling us how he went. So notice here we have the same word, running, which can act like a adverb, okay, which is what this would be here, right? It's adverb because it's modifying the verb. But in this case, it is an adjective in the second example because it's modifying the noun. It's telling us what kind of man or which man. You guys see that? Question?
Yes. That's all for me. Thank you.
Okay. Now, let me give you another couple examples, and then we will look at the scriptural examples. All right, we have he cooked the egg. That's my main clause, my independent clause. Subject he, verb cooked, right? And then the egg is the object. It's receiving the action. Now, boiling it is telling us how he cooked it. Boiling here is my participle. Okay, it's the verb, right? The verb boil plus ing ending. And in this case, it's answering the question of how he boiled it. So it's acting like an adverb because it's modifying the verb. He cooked the egg. That's the main thought. Boiling it tells us how he cooked the egg. All right. Now, the next example here, he ate the boiled egg. Notice here I have boil. Again, we have a form of a participle. We have boil plus an ed ending. So that means it could be a participle. And in this case, we ask the question, okay, what is the word doing here? What is this word boil doing in the sentence? It's describing the egg. It's telling me something about the egg, right? What kind of egg? The boiled egg. And so in this case, it is a participle modifying egg, and it's modifying it as an adjective because egg is a noun. So here we have an example, participle acting like an adjective. In this case above, we had a participle acting like an adverb. All right? Because it's modifying the verb in the first example up here. The second example, he ate the boiled egg. We see boiled modifying egg. All right? Now, let me go through some more examples, but let's just go right to the scripture and just look at some examples from the scripture. All right. Chrysler, you asked the question, can we consider a gerund or an infinitive a connector word? Usually not. Okay, nouns do not behave as connector words, for one. So if you have a gerund, that's a noun, it's not going to behave that way. Sometimes infinitives function like a noun, so they wouldn't be connector words. Once in a while, you might have an infinitive. And next week, I'll show you some examples of that, where an infinitive could be a connector word, but it's usually rare, pretty rare. All right. Normally, they modify. Gerunds don't modify because they behave like nouns. Okay. So they will function like as a subject or an object in a sentence. All right, and we'll see that example in Colossians. So let's take a look here. I'm going to ask you guys for help on this. Here's a passage, Colossians 1:28-29. And I'll just let you know there are some participles in here. All right, so I'm going to ask, I'm going to start with Sonny, because he looks like he's excited. Sonny, as you look at verse 28 here, can you identify the connector words here? Just any connector words that you see.
Connecting word, sir.
Yeah, any connector
And
word. So
the word
jump.
and
Yes. And is
and
what? What kind of connector word is that?
is a conjunction.
Exactly. All right. So we have and. Any others?
With.
So
With. Yes. Good. With. That is, what kind of connector word is with?
Preposition.
Preposition. Yep. It's one of our common ones. Oh, sorry. Preposition.
So that.
So that. Good. What is so that? What kind of
That's
connector word?
a subordinate conjunction.
Yes.
Conjunction.
Yeah, and it is subordinating. Good. So guys, notice here, because some of you, some assignments I noticed, there was a little confusion. So that is one of those conjunctions that is more than one word. So some of you put like so as one as a conjunction and that as a relative pronoun, but so that when it's together is acting like a conjunction. Any others in verse 28, sorry, Sonny. Any other connector words?
Plus
Yes.
in Christ.
Which is, what
In.
kind of connector word is that?
Preposition.
Yes. Very good. Preposition. All right. Do you see any others in verse 28?
Admonishing.
Okay, admonishing. Yes, what do we have there? What kind of connector word is that?
Participle.
It is a
Admonishing and
participle.
teaching.
Yes, and teaching.
Ching.
Notice both of them have the form, right? We have admonish plus an ing ending. We have teach plus ing. Okay, and both of these, by the way, are modifying proclaim. All right, they're both telling us how. How did Paul proclaim? One, admonishing. Two, teaching. And then, so that is why did Paul proclaim him? Okay, it's giving the reason, so that we may present every man complete. Okay, so I'll show you the diagram of this in a moment. Okay, but any other, does anybody see any other connector words in verse 28? Did we catch all of them? I think you got them.
Sir,
Yeah.
are adverbs connector also like the word every?
Yes. Now, like the word every is an adverb, meaning, well, in this case, no, it's modifying man. It's an adjective in this case. It's describing man. How many? So every man, what I typically do on the diagram here, I'll just diagram here, because you could break down every word and the diagram then begins to lose its value. So this is how I would diagram. So we proclaim him admonishing every man and teaching. every man. All right. Now, I could put every underneath man. Oops, what happened? I could put every underneath man because technically it's modifying man. All right. So that's how it's functioning grammatically. But I usually leave, if it's a single word, I just leave it in the phrase because I know it's describing man. It's telling us how many men. But if I start breaking up my diagram in too many small pieces, it will lose its value and importance in showing me the outline of the text. All right. So I typically, unless this was a phrase, you know, I usually just, if it's a single word, I leave it in the phrase. And I just know that it goes with man. I know that this modifies man, but I leave it on the same line because it goes together, admonishing every man, teaching every man. Okay? So that's how I do it. I just leave it there. And then if we look at teaching every man, how do I teach? With all wisdom. So I put that underneath. I'll put with all wisdom underneath teaching because it's describing how. How am I teaching? With all wisdom. And then so that could go with either proclaim or with admonish and teaching. And that's grammatically, it can go either one. It can go here or it could go here. And so you just have to decide what makes the most sense here in the context of the passage. Kim, did you have a question?
Yes, sorry to interrupt again.
No problem.
So if this teaching or this admonishing is not modifying anything, then that's the time that it's working just a regular verb, like it's on a either it's just on its past tense or present or future, right? If it's not
Yeah.
mod okay.
Yeah. So
Uh,
let me do an example where we would see that. Okay, so let's say that Paul said this. We proclaim, if I can spell, we proclaim him and teach every man. Okay, there we would see, all right, both proclaim and teach are acting like regular verbs, right? They're both describing an action. Now, what if he had said, we proclaim him and are teaching every man? Ah, I have a teaching with an ing here. Is that a participle? It sure looks like one. But in this case, it's acting like a verb because it has a subject, we are teaching, and it has this verb of being helping it. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit and describe it. But I'm just giving you an example where you could have the word teaching actually not acting like a participle, but like a verb in this case.
mm,
Or he could have said, we proclaim him by the teaching of the word. Notice here, teaching again, but it's not functioning like a participle. It's acting like a noun in this case. How do I know that? The article in front of it, the. Again, I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, but I'm just giving you a couple examples where that word teaching could be used in a way different than a participle. In both of these cases, teaching is not modifying something else. All right. In this first one, I would put, we proclaim him and we are teaching every man. In the second example, we proclaim him. How? By the teaching of the word. or by teaching of the word. Okay. Now, if you
Uh,
have questions on the, yeah, Kim, do you have a question?
yes. Regarding the Colossians chapter 1, verse 6. Yeah, because one of the things I'm quite confused because of the word that you said here, that because of the word I need to take note of the word it. So I thought, so it really doesn't mean that it should always, the word it should always be close to the participle. Yeah, because the one of the things that confuses me was the bearing and increasing. So I thought that the bearing was modifying the the fruit. So, but it's not, right.
Yeah, I'm going to go through that example with you guys in a little bit. Okay. We're going to go through this exact verse actually in a few minutes. All right. And I'll show you then.
Okay,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, we're going to go through a few of the verses here because, yeah, notice here, bearing and increasing, they look like participles, but they aren't acting like participles in this case. And I'll show you why in a little bit. All right, let's go back to Colossians 1, 28, 29. We have one more verse here. Let me ask, let's see. Jed, can you identify the connector words in verse 29 if you're there? Pastor Jed, are you there?
Uh, for,
Yes. All right, for, connector word. Any others in verse 29?
uh, to,
Two, good. What kind of connector word is that?
preposition.
It's a preposition. Very good. Any others?
Which,
Which? What kind of connector word is that?
relative pronoun.
Very good.
Within,
Within, which is another
preposition.
preposition. All right. Now, any others? I see actually one more.
Striving, sir.
Striving.
Yeah, striving. That's a participle. Notice it's the verb strive, which means basically to work, to make effort, strive plus ing. Okay. And it's modifying labor. It's describing how. Now, before I get to that, one thing to keep note of on prepositions, according to is actually the full preposition. All right. Some prepositions are more than one word, just like some conjunctions can be more than one word in English. And so according to is one of those examples of that's the full preposition. All right. Now, striving, how is striving acting in this sentence? I think if as we diagram, I'd say for this purpose also I labor. And then striving is telling us how I labor. It's answering the question how. It's modifying the verb labor in this case. Okay. So it's acting like an adverb here in this example. Okay. So we had in this example three I'll just show it here. We had in this example from Colossians 1, the purple are the three participles in this particular passage, and they're all acting like participles. We saw for admonishing and teaching, they modify the verb proclaim. And then we we also notice the striving modifies labor, another verb. All right, so they're all three of these were acting like adverbs. Now, what about, oh, let's do one more example from Colossians 4. Actually, you know what I want to do? We'll come back to this because I want to talk about these three verbals again, because I think it'll help us when we look at the examples, because a lot of Kim's question and someone else also asked a question here. As I already mentioned to you, not all verbs that end in ing or end in ed are participles. All right. Again, English verbals are those words which contain a verb but don't act just like a verb. All right. They don't act like a regular verb. So you have to be careful when we're looking at the sentence. And this is what caused some confusion, I think, in the assignment. As we were looking at Colossians, there's many examples of participles, but also there were several examples of words that look like participles, but weren't acting like participles. All right. They're misbehaving. Okay. They're being naughty. Right. They're tricking us. So how do we identify those times when the word looks like a participle, but it's not acting like a participle? Well, I want to try to give you a few hints in how to do that. And again, remember, it all goes back to, we got to ask the question, how does the word, how is it functioning? How is it working in the sentence? What is it doing there? All right. In the case of Colossians 1:28, we had admonishing and teaching. And when we look at the text, we can see, okay, those are telling us how he proclaimed. So they're acting like adverbs. All right. So what we want to try to do is identify, how does this word, what is it doing in the sentence? All right. Now, there are some clues that can guide us to whether or not it's acting like a participle or like a gerund or like a regular verb. So let me show that to you. All right. Regular verbs have a subject and often a helping verb. So for example, he is playing basketball to stay healthy. Notice the word playing. Okay. Playing has the form of a participle, doesn't it? We have play plus ing. Now, is it acting like a participle in this sentence? That means, is it modifying something else in the sentence? Or is it behaving like something else? In this case, it's behaving like a regular verb. It is the action in the sentence. How do I know this? There's two clues. This word playing has a subject. What's the subject? What's doing the action? Right? In this case, he. He is the subject. And then notice in English, we're often given a hint. If the word that looks like a participle, but is actually a verb, you will often see this verb of being in front of it. Okay, the verb of being is. Remember the verbs of being? A verb of being is, was, am, be, become, have been, were. Okay, these are all verbs that describe the state of something, but also in English, they are used to identify a type of action. In this case, he is playing means it's an ongoing action happening right now. It's like you're pointing to the guy saying he is playing basketball to stay healthy. All right. So in this case, playing is acting like a verb. It is the action. It's not modifying something in the sentence. It is the action of the sentence. Another way to see that is, what if we took this out? What if we say, okay, playing is a participle here. So it's modifying something. Well, then I got to ask myself, well, where's my verb in the sentence? If it's not playing, if playing is modifying something, is he saying he is basketball to stay healthy? Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? So playing here has to be acting like the verb. It is the action. There's no other verbs here that would make sense. And we have the two clues. We have the verb of being is, and we have the subject, he. He is playing basketball, and then the object would be basketball. Now, to stay healthy, that's a phrase that is modifying playing, and it's telling us why. Why is he playing? To stay healthy. So that would go under here, under the verb. So the full verb is playing. That's my verb in this sentence. Okay? Any questions on this? All right, so look for a subject, look for a verb of being in front of it. And this will explain your question, Kim, from Colossians 1:6, because we have a subject and a verb of being there, and I'll show you that when we get to the text. All right, the other way that a word which looks like a participle, but is not acting like one, is in the case of gerunds. Gerunds also have the same form of a verb plus ing. All right, so for example here, the playing of basketball helps him stay healthy. Now notice here, playing is not the action. Helps is actually the verb in the sentence. The playing of basketball helps. Helps is my verb here. Him is my object. So, what does that mean then for playing? Is playing modifying something? Well, in this case, it is not, because it's acting like a noun. How do I know that? Well, one clue is, notice the article the in front of it. All right? Articles always modify a noun. And an article is a, an, or the. They always modify a noun. They always point to a noun. So here it's the playing. Playing here is the noun. It is the subject of the sentence. Okay? Of basketball modifies playing, right? Because notice of's a preposition. It's a connector word. So it's the playing. Playing is my subject. Basketball is not my subject. Basketball isn't what helps him stay healthy, a basketball. It's the playing that helps him stay healthy. All right? So what you want to look for is, see if there's an article in front of the word that looks like a participle. Okay, that will usually indicate that this word is a noun. Okay, so in this case, the is connected to playing. All right? And of basketball modifies playing. It's telling what kind of playing. But the sentence would look like this. If I were to diagram it, I would diagram it this way. The playing, what kind of playing? Of basketball. Helps him stay healthy. All right, and of basketball is inserted between, it's modifying basketball, what kind of playing, and then helps him. Helps is my verb. So I would just show it this way on a diagram. I would connect it with a line. This is how whenever a sentence is split, I just show the connection by putting a line in. So the sentence is, the playing helps him stay healthy. And then of basketball modifies playing. But here, playing's not a participle. It's actually a noun. It's the subject of my sentence. So again, if you ask yourself, okay, I have one clue, I've got the article the there, so that's going to tell me this is pointing to a noun, and playing is that noun, because when I think about the sentence, how is that word functioning here? Well, it's what helps him stay healthy. The playing helps him. So playing's acting like the subject in this sentence. Questions on that? We'll do some more examples. Participles then will have no subject or article. All right. So if you look at the word playing here in this sentence, all right, it's got the form of a participle, play plus ing. Then I have to ask, okay, but is it acting like a participle? Is it modifying a noun or a verb in the sentence? Well, then I have to say, okay, does it have a subject? Or does it have an article? Okay, no article. There's no the in front of it. But is there a subject? Is it acting like a verb? Well, he stays healthy. That's a clause. He is the subject. Stays is my verb. Healthy modifies the verb there. He stays healthy playing basketball every Saturday. Okay, so is it he playing basketball? No, it's he stays healthy. That's my clause. Playing basketball is the phrase modifying healthy. And it's describing how. How does he stay healthy? By playing basketball. And then every Saturday is when he plays basketball. All right. So in this case, playing is a participle. There's no subject, there's no article, or we should also look for a verb of being in front of it. Is, am, are, and none of that's here. So this is how you're going to need to approach when you see a word that looks like a participle. You're going to need to ask yourself these questions. And I put this in the form of a diagram. Those of you who are engineers can appreciate this. Engineers, we love these diagrams, these flow diagrams, they're called. All right. Thank you, Chrysler, my engineering brother. So for my engineering brothers, hopefully you'll appreciate this. But basically, this is the kind of process you're going to need to learn, unfortunately, for participles, because they are more complicated to see in English. Is there a verb of being before the word? Do you see is, am, be, or are? If there is, then it is a regular verb. It's acting like a verb. If there's not, then ask yourself, is there a subject to this word? Is it an action being carried out? If so, it's a regular verb. And then lastly, if not, then lastly, look for an article. Is there an article in front of the word? If so, then it's a noun. If not, you likely have a participle. Now, there's a way to cheat on this, and that's look at the Greek text, the interlinear. All right, but before you start doing that, I want you to learn how to identify them in English for a couple of reasons. One is that if you can identify these participles in English, you're going to be helping yourself to learn the language better, because participles are used not just in the Bible, English translation, they're used all the time in English. All right. So this will better equip you as you're handling English resources. But also, too, to look for, identify a participle in English, because if you're explaining the text, sometimes in English, you'll need to be able to explain it using the English. You won't be able to go to the Greek. Okay. So, but ideally, in the Greek text, we'll know exactly if it's a participle because of the way it's formed. And so if you're using an interlinear, or if you have the Bible Discovery app, it'll identify the word as a participle. All right. But sometimes the English text won't show that. So what I want you to first learn how to do this in English, and then I'll show you as we get more advanced how to use the interlinear and use the Greek text for for further to be able to better identify these participles. But for now, we're using the English translation, so I want to stick with that. Okay. So let's take a look at Colossians 1 as an example and see. And we're just going to focus on the participles or the words that look like participles. Okay. But before we do that, are there any questions? Kim mentioned his question was answered. Are there any others that you have? I might.
Pastor Tim.
Yeah, Yancy.
Yeah, just for a clarification, is the word being is not a verb of being?
Yes, being can also be a participle. We think we'll have an example of that in Colossians.
Yeah, like in our assignment, there is a having been firmly rooted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a participle. So sometimes the ing will actually be the helping verb there. There's let me show you this one. Okay, back to these. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1. It's literally you being dead in your trespasses and sins. All right, here we have be plus ing. And actually, in this case, it is acting like a participle. It's modifying you, being dead. So it would look like this on a diagram. You being dead, how? In your trespasses and sins. All right. Or you mentioned an example of, having been was one of the
Firmly rooted.
Oh, family been, yeah, established, rooted, and established. So here's an example where we have this is the full participle, having been rooted. It all goes together. But notice we have the verb of being here, been, but having shows us it's a participle. All right, so it's a more complicated example. So actually, I think we'll see that in let's get to the text and start going through some of the passages together. I think that'll help us. All right, let me just skip these and go right to Colossians. Okay, so let's cover Colossians 1. This is one that Kim brought up earlier. And there are a couple of places here where most of you identified the participle when it wasn't really a participle. So I want to point that out. Okay, so let's just look only for words. In this case, we're not going to do all the connector words yet. We'll cover that next week. We'll go back through the text here. I just want to cover those words that look like participles and then see if they actually are. All right. So as we look at verse 3, do we see any words in verse 3 that look like they might be a participle?
Praying.
Praying.
Yes, praying, right? Yes, praying, right? So we have pray plus ing. Okay, so we want to go through. Right, we have pray plus ing. So that looks like a connector word, participle, sorry. All right, so we want to go through, let's go through our, give me a second. I'm going to copy our little table, What? Oops. Sorry, guys, I'm having technical difficulties here. Give me a second to figure this out. Okay, here we go. All right, hopefully you can see the whole screen here. Everybody see my whole screen? So we've got Colossians 3 on the left side, and then we've got our decision tree on the right here. You guys see that? Okay. All right, so let's go through this then. All right, so we're going to ask ourselves, we give thanks to God. So we give thanks. That's my main clause. To God is a phrase. Father of our Lord Jesus Christ is a phrase. Praying always for you. Praying always. It's like a phrase. And then for you. And then since we heard, that's another clause. So as we look at this, does praying look like, is there a verb of being before the word praying? Is there am, is, be? Did anybody see that here? No, right? No, right? All right. So is there a subject? Well, we give thanks to God, Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. So is there a subject? Is somebody mentioned here as praying, like he is praying or they are praying? Not in this case. The only possible, the nouns here are we, God, Father, and Jesus Christ. So it's not God the Father or Jesus Christ praying, and he's not saying we praying because he says we give thanks. So there is no subject. Is there an article in front of praying? No, the only article is the here, and it goes with Father. So this praying here seems to be acting like a participle. Okay? Questions on that? All right, I should probably, you know what? I think it'd be easier to actually flip this around. And move I'm going to change up this decision tree a little bit. I think it's easier to do it this way. All right. All right, guys, thank you for your patience. I'm going to do it this way. Okay. It's better to start with looking for the article. I think that's easier. All right. Let's keep going. Verse 4, since we heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and your love for all the saints, do we see any words that look like they might be a participle there?
None.
None. Okay. How about verse 5? Because of the hope laid up for you in heaven, of which you previously heard in the word of truth, the gospel.
None.
None. All right. Which has come to you, just as in all the world also, it is constantly bearing fruit and increasing. It's a long verse. Also, since the day you heard of it and understood the grace of God and truth. Do we have any words here that look like they might be a participle in English?
Bearing.
Bearing.
Yep. Bearing,
Bearing.
increasing,
Bearing.
Increasing.
Increasing.
Doing.
doing. Yep. Okay. So let's do our test here. All right. Let me regroup these. Oh man, I gotta select them all. Okay. All right, so let's start with bearing. Do we see an article in front of the word? The
No.
bearing, a bearing.
No article.
No, right? So it doesn't seem to be a noun. And actually, I should have. Sorry, guys. Let me flip these two around as well. Do we see a verb of being in front of the word? Oops. That's
Yes.
okay. All right. There we go. Yeah. Now notice there is not one right in front of the word, but we see the word is here. You guys see that? Is constantly bearing. All right. Now, if that word constantly wasn't there, it would be more clear, but we do. This word is goes with bearing. Otherwise, where does it go? Right? Just as in all the world also, it is what? Where would it go? So it seems to be going with bearing.
Bearing.
Okay. Is bearing fruit, is increasing. So it seems like there is a verb of being that goes with these, that is goes with bearing here, is bearing and is increasing. Otherwise, there's no, it is what? You see the problem? We have to ask ourselves what's going on here. And again, normally we would have already identified, okay, which has come is a clause, to you, a phrase, just as, that's a conjunction there. In all the world also is another phrase. And then we have it is. Okay. So here it looks like the word is goes with bearing and increasing. And then it is a pronoun that serves as the subject of that. It is bearing. It is increasing. Okay, so that's it is bearing fruit. And implied it is increasing. So in this case, bearing and increasing are not participles, they're functioning as verbs. It is bearing, meaning it's ongoing, present tense. All right, it's happening now. What is the it? The gospel. The gospel which has come to you, it is constantly bearing fruit and increasing. And then even as it has been doing, okay, we have the word doing here. Same thing. Notice in front of it, there's no article, but we do see a verb of being, been. And again, we have a subject, it. It has been doing in you. So in this example, these three words that look like participles actually are acting like regular verbs.
Hey,
And yeah, Russell. Did you have a question?
no.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought I heard you.
Pastor Tim.
Yes.
In the English tense, this bearing, increasing, and doing has been described as present participle.
You may see some grammars describe it as a present participle only because bearing looks like a participle. It has that form,
Yeah.
but this
Yeah,
is not
so-
acting like one.
But in English tense grammar, to make a progressive tense, present progressive tense, we have to the form is be plus the present participle.
Yes, correct.
But it's considered a regular verb.
Yeah, but it's not acting like a participle. And that's why I don't
So
really.
therefore, the participle that we are looking for as a connector is different from the present past participle that is in the tense in the grammar tense of a verb. Is that different?
Let's see, what do you mean? I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay. In the regular tense in the English grammar, to form a progressive present progressive tense, we have the form is be plus the present participle.
Yes.
Yeah. So although this word being verb plus ing, they are called present participle in the regular verb tenses. But my question is it different participle that we are looking as a connector or in the regular verb?
Yeah, it is. It's functioning differently. It looks the same, but it functions differently. And that's what we care about. We want to know, how is this word or phrase or clause working in the sentence? How is it functioning in the sentence? What is it doing? All right. So when we say participle, strictly speaking, the definition of that is a verb plus ing ending. That's why you see in the English grammar, it will say be plus a participle. But I think that's confusing because we really care about what's the word doing here. And a participle doesn't act like a verb. You have to do more stuff to it to make it act like a verb. So I like just the idea of a participle functions like an adverb or an adjective. It modifies something else. Now, if you put that word that looks like a participle with the verb of being, be, it's doing something different. It's acting like a verb. And you use the technical term, progressive present. All that means is that it's emphasizing ongoing action now. Okay. For example, I could say it bears fruit. Okay, that is present tense, right? Bears here is my verb in the present tense. All right, so it's just saying that's just present tense, but it could be describing it bears fruit now, or this thing, generally speaking, bears fruit in a general sense. But if I say it is bearing fruit, now I'm emphasizing something about it. That too is present tense. All right, ongoing action, present tense, but it's happening now. All right, it's emphasizing this. The progressive just means ongoing activity, and it's happening now when I use the present tense. So that's why he doesn't say it bears fruit. He's saying it is bearing fruit to emphasize that this is happening now. It's an ongoing action or activity. Okay. So the word can look like a participle, verb plus ing, but in this, when you add the verb of being here, in this case it is bearing fruit. Okay, well now I've changed what the word that this word is doing. It's now acting like a verb. Is bearing is my verb. And it's emphasizing ongoing action now. I don't know if I made it clearer or more confusing. Does that make sense? So just look for, see if you can find the verb of being. Is, was, be in front of that word. If you find it there, then it's likely functioning as a verb, not a participle. Again, when I use the term participle, I'm emphasizing the idea of the ing verb, but it's functioning like an adverb or adjective. It's modifying something else, and that's the key. Participles always modify. Unless you're putting a verb of being and a subject in front of it. Then it acts differently. It's not acting like a participle anymore. It's acting like, in this case, a regular verb, is bearing, and is increasing. That's the second. So Paul here is saying the gospel is doing two things here. It's constantly bearing fruit, and it is increasing. And then again, same thing on this clause here. Has been doing. I look at doing and I say, okay, is there an article? Oops. Is there an article before the word doing? I don't see an article here. So then I ask the next question. Is there a verb of being before the word doing? Ah, yes, there is. Been. And then I notice it is a subject. It has been doing. So has been doing is my verb here. Okay. Let's keep going. Now, just as you learned it from Epaphras, our fellow bondservant who's a faithful servant of Christ, some of you identified, oh, look, learned. I have a verb plus an ed ending. So some of you indicated, well, that's a participle because it looks like one. Well, hold on a minute. We've got to do the test. Is there an article in front of it? No, no article. Is there a verb of being in front of it? Well, no, in this case, there isn't. But notice we have a subject in front of it, don't we? You learned. So here, actually, this verb is a past tense verb. We have the subject you, and then we have the verb learned, past tense. Remember in English, verbs that end in ed are likely past tense verbs. Only occasionally, they might be a participle. But when you see a verb with an ed ending like this, assume first it is a past tense verb in English. And you can verify that by saying, okay, is there a subject? Is there something that's doing the action? In this case, just look at the word right before it. You learned. That's who's doing the action. You. Same, look at the next verse. Informed. Informed may look like a participle, but notice it has a subject. He informed. Otherwise, what's the he doing here? And he also what? If informed is a participle, it's going to be modifying something else. But in this case, informed is the action. He informed us of your love. So there is a subject here to this word. So whenever you see a verb plus an ed ending, it's more likely going to be a past tense verb. It's more likely going to be a verb, not a participle. So what you need to do there, just look for a subject. Do I see a subject here? Okay, verse 9, same thing. Ceased. What does that look like? Ah, it looks like a participle, but I'm going to first assume it's a past tense verb. And then I say, okay, is there a subject to it? Yes, we. We have not ceased to pray for you. All right. So in each of these cases, we have a subject, which tells us then that these particular words are actually past tense English verbs. And Brother Jim talked about these. He went through these when we did textual observations. Remember where you're looking at asking about the verb and trying to identify the tense, and the past tense verb in English has an ed ending. So that's again what makes this a little confusing, is sometimes it could be a participle, but usually, not always, usually verbs that end in ed are past tense verbs. Sometimes they will be participles. Now, how do I know that? Well, I've got to go through this decision tree and ask, do I see a verb of being or a subject? Okay, we have again. Now here's a tricky one. Yeah. Don't you love English, guys? You may be filled. Oh, there's a verb of being. But notice there's also a subject. You may be filled. May be filled is actually the verb. The subject is you. So that's my key. There will always be a subject if it's acting like a regular verb. All right. This is a key test. Can you find a subject? And that's why we break down, if you break down all the phrases and clauses, that will help you to answer that question, because you'll have a word here and it has to go somewhere. So for example, verse 9, for this reason, we have not ceased. All right. Since the day we heard of it, that is a clause. To pray for you, that's a phrase. And to ask that you may be filled, that's a phrase. With the knowledge, phrase. Sorry, ask that you may be filled is a clause, because there's a verb here. So as we break up the phrases and clauses here in this, as we do that, then we'll begin to see, okay, what you goes with may be filled. So it helps us to see that, yes, you is the subject here of the verb may be filled. All right. Covered a lot of stuff there. How you guys doing? Questions on this? Is it making a little more sense? I hope. If not,
It
ask me.
helps.
Okay, let's
So Tim,
yeah, Sunny.
so basically, as I observed, basically there are two kinds of participle that modifies the verb and also modifies the noun. Is that correct? So
Yep.
adverbial participle and call it subjective or what?
Adjectival. Adjectival. Adjective. Yeah.
Adjectival. Okay, all right.
Yeah. Yes, you're exactly right. That's why I'm using the term more specifically when I say participle. I'm using it as a connector, in the sense of it as a connector word that modifies, always modifies, if it's a participle, if it's acting like a participle. If it's acting like a verb, because it's has a subject, then it's no longer modifying. Verbs don't modify, regular verbs. Nouns don't modify. Only adverbs and adjectives modify. That's by their definition, right? That's why I showed that table. Nouns, verbs, adverbs, adjectives. Those are the four basic parts of speech in English. Nouns and verbs don't modify. Adverbs and adjectives do. Now, you can have a single word that modifies, or you can have a phrase or clause that modifies. And so if we have a preposition, if we have a phrase, phrases always modify. They don't stand alone. Participles introduce phrases. Participles always modify. All right. So that's why I'm spending time on this, because if you do identify a participle, then you know by its definition it's modifying something. It's either modifying a noun or a verb. Rarely, sometimes an adverb or adjective, but that's rarely the case for participles. Now, in Greek, participles do some other things too, but they do also in Greek have that similar function where they modify a noun or a verb.
Yeah,
All
sir,
right.
another curious questions I have here.
Yeah, sure.
Is participle always function as in a present spec like that, in a present tense,
Oh,
or it
no.
could be also used in the past?
Yes. Could be used past tense. Let's take a look here. I'll show you. By the way, here we have an example in verse 10, bearing. Same word we saw in verse 9, right? I'll get to your question in a minute, Sonny. But where we had it is bearing in verse 9, where bearing here was a verb because it is bearing. But later in verse 10, he uses the same word, but here it is a participle. There is no verb of being or subject in front of this one. In this case, it modifies. You will walk in a manner to please him all respects, bearing fruit. I think it's modifying walk in this case. And increasing. So the same two words were used as participles earlier. Just a couple verses later, the same words are used as, earlier they were used as regular verbs. Now he is describing using the same two terms now as participles. All right. But let's go to, I want to answer Sonny's question. Here in chapter 2, we have some examples of participles that are being used in the past tense. All right. Verse 12. Well, first it starts, and in him you are also circumcised. So let me just break up the phrases and clauses here. With a circumcision made without hands. They just put that together. In the removal, I'm just dividing up of the body, of the flesh. And again, notice each of these are introduced by connector words. Okay, of Christ. And then we get to, having been buried. Well, I have having here. Okay, that's have plus ing. All right, looks like a participle. And it's actually is a participle in the past tense. Having been buried with him. So it is a participle. It is modifying an action here or a subject here. I think it's describing you. You having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised up with him. So having been buried is a participle modifying a noun in this case, I believe. It's describing the you. It could go to a couple other things, but we'll just go with that for now. But then notice here we have raised up. Well, there's raise ending in ed. But notice here, this one is not a participle because it has a subject, you. You were raised up. So it's not modifying in this case. That actually is the clause. Because we have to ask as you get to which you what? You were raised up. This all goes, this is one clause here. But it's the having been buried. So having, and there's no subject to this one. It's functioning as a regular participle. There's another example in verse 13. Having forgiven. That too is functioning as a participle, modifying how he made you alive. It's modifying that verb made. How? Having forgiven us all our transgressions. And then notice another participle after that, having canceled out the certificate of decrees. So those are both past tense. They're describing an action that it took place previously. So that's how he made you alive, by, in the past, having forgiven, having canceled out. Does that make sense, Sonny?
Yes, yes, sir. So it's very helpful. So I observe here that the participles really supports the main idea of the writer. Let's say Apostle Paul was talking about the circumcision here, and he supported by, by a series of participle. Yeah, is that also correct?
Yeah, you have to identify where it's going. So like, for example, in the thing I just mentioned, he made you alive. And then how did he do that? Two ways, having forgiven, having canceled out. So those are modifying made, because they're describing how he made you alive. Up here, having been buried, I think is describing, modifying you. It could modify were circumcised, how you were circumcised. But I think it more likely goes with you. So that's an interpretive decision. But by noting that this is a participle, I know it modifies something. I have to then think about and figure out, what is it modifying? That's the biggest challenge, really.
Yeah.
But knowing that it's a
Exactly.
participle helps me, because it tells me, okay, I know it's modifying something here. It's not standing by itself. It's not standing alone. Okay. Now, if it's a regular verb, the verb, like you were raised, that's not modifying anything. That's making a statement. Now, this statement as a whole is modifying something because it's being introduced by the word which. And I think it's modifying baptism. Baptism in which, but it could be also circumcision in which. So you have to think about some theology here to consider as well. But at least as far as the grammar tells us whether or not something is modifying something else.
Pastor
Uh,
Tim,
Yes, Chrysler.
what about the certificate of debt consisting? The word consisting, is that also a participle?
Good question. Yeah, let me get rid of this. Okay, so we have certificate of debt consisting. That looks like, first we ask, does it look like a participle? It does, because consist is a verb in English. And it does have an ing ending. So it looks like it could be a participle. So I go through my tree here. Is there an article? Okay, well, I see an article here, but where does that article go? It goes with certificate, right? Usually the article goes with the word right in front of behind it, usually. So it's not the consisting, all right? Then I check my next thing. Is there a verb of being in front of consisting? Nope. No is, no be, no am, having, been, nothing like that. Then I ask, is there a subject? Well, it doesn't say the certificate of debt. That can't be the subject because the certificate of debt goes with having canceled out. Having canceled out what? The certificate of debt. So consisting, there is no verb here. Subject here. So it is a participle. And it's modifying what? What do you think it modifies?
I think that certificate.
Yes. It's telling us what kind of certificate. The one consisting of decrees against us. So in this case, it's acting like an adjective because it's modifying a noun. So if we were to diagram it, we would put consisting under certificate. We'd actually put of debt also under certificate. Okay.
All right. Another thing, Pastor Tim.
Yes.
I'm actually confused, especially on the conjunction, especially the word when. When can I say the word conjunction when? Because that's
Oh,
one of my mistakes. Like for
okay.
example, verse 13, I think,
Yes. Or
13, I think it starts with when, or yeah, 13, I think that's a conjunction. Yeah.
yes.
And the verse 15, I did not highlight it. I'm not really sure if it is a conjunction, the verse 15.
Yes.
I'm,
Typically
yeah,
it
yeah.
is. Typically it is. If we go back to the list of common conjunctions, and we'll cover this next week, Lord willing. Remember we had the coordinating conjunctions, and those are and, nor, but, or, and yet. Those connect to equal ideas. Then we had subordinating conjunctions. And the most common ones, notice when, where, and while are in
Okay.
that list.
Okay.
So when you see when
Okay.
or where or while, it's probably a subordinating conjunction.
Okay.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then in that sentence, then what is it doing? Let's go back to it. If I just look at verse 13 here, when you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive. So when you were dead, that's my clause. Because notice in your transgressions, that's a phrase introduced by in, right? That's my connector word. And the uncircumcision, another connector word. Of your flesh, another phrase. He made you alive. He made you alive is the independent clause. So this is how I would diagram it. He made you alive. When did he make you alive? When you were dead. How are you dead? Or what kind of death? In your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh.
Ooh, okay.
And he made you alive. That's my main statement here.
Main statement. All right.
That's the independent clause.
Okay.
And this is an example of when a dependent clause is put in front of the thing it modifies. And here it's telling us when he made you alive. He made you alive when you were dead. So what you could do is, if you want on your diagram, you could just draw an arrow to make that more clear.
Okay.
Okay. And then dead. This says in your transgressions would be idea of where you were dead. Okay, so that's how I would diagram this. The same in verse 15. If you go to verse 15, he does the same thing. All right, where he talks
The
about,
independent clause is he
Yep.
made, right?
exactly, he made a public display. That's my independent clause. When he had disarmed the rulers, that's a dependent clause. And authorities goes with rulers, but notice and there. He made a public display. So this is what I do with verse 15. Oops. All right, he made a public display. What kind of display of them? And here's another participle. How did he make that?
Mhm.
Okay, so having triumphed is a participle here, past tense. So notice when he disarmed the rulers and authorities, that says when he made a public display. And then how did he make a public display? By having triumphed over them. And then how did he triumphed over them? Through him, through Christ.
The through there is a preposition, Pastor
It's a
Tim, right?
preposition. Yep. So notice all of these are beginning with the connector word of them, having triumphed over them. Over actually is also a preposition. Through him. But the sentence actually begins with a dependent clause. All right. Now, if
Yeah.
that word when was not there, okay, what if we just had this? What if Paul had just said he had disarmed the rulers and authorities? He made a public display. What would that look like? Well, now the when is no longer there, is it? So this is no longer, it would no longer be a dependent clause. It would now be independent. It's making a statement that
Independent.
stands alone.
Mhm.
Okay. So it would look like this. When he disarmed the rulers and authorities, he made a public display. All right. So now we'd be making two statements, two equal in importance. But when he puts that word when in, now he's modifying the one statement. He made a public display when he had disarmed the rulers. So his focus is the fact that he made a public display. And then we have these modifiers. When he disarmed the rulers. How? Having triumphed over them. That makes sense? Questions there?
Thank you, Pastor Tim. Yeah, it's clear.
Okay.
I think the challenge is when the independent clause is somewhere in between. I think that's the challenge there. Kasi usually the independent clause is usually right at the beginning of the paragraph. That this example is right at the middle.
Yeah, exactly. That is the challenge. And oftentimes when you see that in English, you can have phrases and clauses, dependent ones at the beginning. Sometimes that's done often in the Greek text in order for there to be emphasis. I haven't looked at this passage to see, but it's very likely that Paul put that dependent clause first for emphasis. When he disarmed the rulers, he made a public display. But still, the independent clause, he didn't put it at the beginning, so that makes it confusing. So, yeah, if you guys, those of you that finished the assignment, if you look, I tried to put in, identify every connector word and give you a reason, like if it looked like a participle but wasn't, I tried to give you an explanation. So I wanted this session to kind of hopefully give more detail as to how do you determine if you have a participle? This is the hardest connector word to deal with in English. In Greek, it's not very difficult because the way the words are constructed, you can tell right away it's a participle. But English, you have all these other challenges. You know, is there a verb of being in front of it? You know, is there an article in front of it? Because it can look like a participle, but actually function like a gerund or a verb. So yeah, take a look at the comments I made on your assignments. If you still have a question or doesn't make sense, please ask. Next week, plan to focus attention on the other connector words. They're not as difficult. You know, the conjunctions, prepositions are much easier to spot. And the relative pronouns are really easy. It's just 3 words to remember: who, which, or that. So those are easy to spot as well, except for the word that. Sometimes that behaves differently. So let's keep that in mind. Kim?
Yeah, how about maybe next week regarding the infinitives as well?
Yes.
Because I think that's one of the it didn't confuse me, but it was tricky.
Yes.
I was able to take notice of that after receiving my, your feedback. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it would really be better if we can discuss more of it as well next week.
Yeah, definitely. That's going to be a focus because I did notice infinitives were a challenge for many of you. And so there's again, an easy way to check that, but it's just, again, one of more things you need to check. Now, in Greek has infinitives that do function similarly to English ones. There are some differences, but they are similar. But there are infinitives in Greek and in Hebrew, by the way. In English, there's a particular way we can see what an infinitive is. So I'll cover that as well next week. There is a chance I might be traveling. If I am, I'll record a video. So at least you'll have that. So if I have to do that, we won't be able to answer live questions, but at least I'll record it if I'm not able to do this live. My intent is to do as many of these live as I can, and I've also asked the help of Jim. I think he's on the video here. I think he's going to help out as well for some of these. Are you there, Jim? I know it's late where you guys are, but if you are, feel free to say hello.
Yeah, I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Ah, he's in a tunnel. All right. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining. I know there's a lot of details and different there are you know, the problem with English is you have rules, but there are so many exceptions. And so the more I try to teach this, the more I realize how difficult this language is. Even as a first language for me, there's a lot of challenges. But so I understand, guys. So that's why I don't want you to feel bad if you didn't catch things on the assignments. Just use this as a learning experience for you, and you'll get there. So, so again, Lord willing, I'll see you next week. If not, I'll definitely record a session for us on the other connector words, and then we'll move towards doing some diagramming examples, and actually even diagramming. We'll actually work out the diagrams for your assignments. So if you join us, you'll be able to kind of see it. We'll be helping you with one of the assignments by going through the passage for that assignment. Okay. I think it's assignment 1.14. All right, guys. Well, let me ask Nigel, if you're there, Nigel, could you close our time in prayer?